I think maybe not Chesto himself, but the model of the contemporary global DJ is, I think, the model for journalism's professional identity moving forward. Chesto does something really well that I think journalists can read from. And Chris was so nice enough to mention a book that I've written a couple of years ago called MediaWork, where I compare the working lives of media professionals across a variety of industries, so journalists and people in advertising, people who work in Hollywood, film, television, and game developers. And I compared those people in 4 different countries: the US, South Africa, where I spent some time, New Zealand, and the Netherlands, my home country. And just interviewing them and asking them sort of, so what's it like to do what you do? And how do you make it work? And the reason for that is that I think all those media professionals, even though what they do and the content they produce is obviously very different and they serve different functions in our lives and in our societies, but they all struggle with exactly the same questions. Why isn't my audience an audience anymore? What is the deal with the internet or social media? Am I obsolete because I don't know, and then you fill in the name of any kind of software program or social media platform, and so on and so forth. I mean, how can I tell the story that I really want to tell under all this commercial pressure? I mean, a game developer has that discussion just as much as a journalist at the New York Times has. But the interesting thing is that these industries all have come up with different answers. And those answers speak to the culture within those industries. And they tend not to listen to each other for all kinds of reasons. Because they don't take each other seriously, they think that the other people are idiots, like advertising creators think journalists are idiots, journalists think that they're better than everybody else, Hollywood people think that they are rock stars, and game developers are just angry all the time. Because why else would you make games where you just kill everything? Anyways, but they come up with interesting solutions to problems, and so that was the motivation for comparing their solutions. And look, that book came out in 2007, which is ancient history. And I was fortunate enough to meet my editor today in San Francisco, and we talked about the new edition. And the new edition, I think, should be modeled after Chesto. So that's the second reason that I wanted to share something with them. So what I'm going to do today is talk about a little bit about sort of what I think the future for professional identity of media professionals is, and particularly journalists. I'm going to set that in the context of, well, we're all book authors here. So I've got a book coming out this summer called MediaLife. And I think that is, for me, the most profound context within which the work of media professionals takes place. So I'll use that as context. So I'm going to first talk about that work, which is, MediaLife is a book that is basically 298 pages trying to explain that we don't live with, but in media. Which in a nutshell means that the perspective that we live with media suggests that we can do something about them. Like, for example, switch them off, which is impossible. And quite literally so. I don't know, some of you are flying on airplanes. I don't know if you've noticed a subtle shift in the last couple of years where they used to ask you to turn your devices off. And now they ask you to switch them in their airplane mode, or in this sort of, I mean, they don't even talk about off switches anymore. Actually, the plane that I took here from Salt Lake, they said, well, some of you may have a device with an off switch, you need to switch that off now. The others need to make sure that it's stowed, and they just give up because you can't even actually switch them off. And this is not new, right? I mean, when the first remote control came out, remember that one, the Space Commander 2000? Zenith made that wonderful device. It didn't have an off switch. Right? I mean, remote controls never had off switches. You could mute and you could change the channel, and that was pretty much it. So living in media suggests that there is really nothing we can do to media as external to us. They are very much part of us in all kinds of different ways, both technologically but also emotionally. Right? We love our media. Sometimes people, when they describe their media, it's like they're describing their ideal partner. Like somebody who's reliable and trustworthy and is there for me when I need him, and is, you know, and tells me what I need to know and what I should do, and makes me laugh, makes me cry, makes me, right? And they're talking about an iPad. And, so we, you know, there's real love for our media, and that also explains why. I mean, the notion that we're somehow outside of them, that they are cold machines that we can have some kind of neutral, objective, and functionalist response to. That's like what, and I'm sorry to say, Fred and colleagues, what academics, media scholars pretend, but it's nonsense. It's utter and complete nonsense, and I think we should do away with that idea as quickly as possible. So that, I think, is the context. I'll talk a little bit of how I see that play out, sort of roughly in media work or creative labor generally, and then finally we're going to go beyond journalism. Because I think in order for a journalist to survive, he or she needs to go beyond the journalism that we know today. And I'm not talking about quality of journalism or writing skills or fact-checking, because obviously that's what we expect of our best and brightest, and that's not going to go away anywhere, right? But I'm talking about going away from the system, and Alan will have much more intelligent things to say about that, and so I'll see if I can get us jump-started there. So life in media. First of all, life in media talks about that we live in media in terms of what we do with our media. Right, there's almost nothing anymore, no activity anymore that doesn't involve media one way or another. And one of the most interesting things about when we as scholars do studies on how people use media is we find two things over time. That every single study we or marketing researchers do or scholars do about how people use media concludes that whatever population we just studied, they use more media than the last time we studied them, or somebody else studied them, right? We use more and more media more of the time. That's the first discussion. I mean, you can basically ignore, this is a horrible thing to say, all media use research. Because it only concludes the same thing over and over again. Last year they did 11.5 hours, no, it's 12, right? And yeah, we use more and more media, and it's not just people in the United States, it's people everywhere. So that's one conclusion. The second conclusion is that those studies can constantly come back on. People have no flippant idea that they're doing it. And they're becoming less and less aware of it, even though they talk more about media all the time. So how does this work? It's like when, let's say the average amount of hours that people spend today with media is 13.5 per day. And this includes everything, right? I mean, from media that you see on the side of the road and your sort of environment, but also the media that you whip out of your pocket and that you switch on and off or try to, and all that kind of stuff. But when people self-report on media use, they don't come further than about 5 or 6 hours. So where do these other 7 hours go? Nowhere, right? We don't know. The more we use media, the more they disappear from our active awareness of them, which inevitably means two things. One is that they become fused with us, and second, that they become supremely powerful, because as any therapist can tell you, that what you don't see or know of ends up running your life, right? Your subconscious first. So we live in media and we do things with media all the time and we can't get out of it. And it's not just here in sort of the Western world or those kind of things. It's not just either at work or when we go out. It's also in India or in the favelas in Rio de Janeiro. And you give people media or they take media and it ends up running. They run with it, they get it, they do it, they live through it. Interesting, we also live in media in terms of the technologies that they are, because what are the technologies telling us? The evolution of media technologies goes into the same direction as what we do with media. It's that media technologies aim for one thing and one thing only today. They try to make themselves invisible. All our technologies try to stay away and sort of get out of our way and pretend that they're not really there. When you think about the newest smartphones that you sort of touch and feel and they magically do things. And they're not really phones anymore. You watch TV on them, you play games, you search for the answers to life's questions, and you fall in love with their personal assistants that are programmed in them, and those kind of things. Right? I mean, they're not really devices anymore. They're sort of, and they lay in your hand and they're slightly curved and they come with pretty colors that you can customize. It's beautiful. They're not even really there. Or, media turn us into media, right? I mean, and not just when we play games like on the Kinect, But now, of course, our remote controls become our bodies, right? I mean, the new features of the Kinect that by waving or the channels change, programs get activated. I'm always wondering what happens when 2 or 3 people are sitting in front of the TV at the same time and all want to see something else. They're going to go jump in front of the TV to get the right channel. But right, we become media in that sense. Or like science reported last year with epidermal electronics, right? Computer chips that are like henna tattoos, right? You mold them onto your skin and you can use them to do anything you want. And this is, you know, in fact, already old technology. And this is, and I'm not even talking about ubiquitous computing and all that other fancy and good stuff. Media disappear from us, they fuse with us, they become us, we become them. And finally, we live in media in terms of how we make sense of the world. And I mean, I can give countless examples. And why not do that? I've got plenty of time. I'm going to give you examples from just the last year of things that all of us have seen happening. And none of these things were caused by media, but at the same time, none of these things existed and worked the way they did without media. And of course, the Arab Spring is one of the most fundamental examples here, right? So this was when it started in January, and of course you can see the devices everywhere. New York Times had a front page story about Cairo's Facebook flat that kind of was sort of the heart of the uprising. Or the Indignados movement in Spain, right? People protesting, young people, 25% unemployment rate among people under the age of 25. I mean, that's unemployment, that a couple of freelance writers are struggling here. But at the same, I mean, these movements and telling people where to show up and what to do, everything works through smartphone, through those invisible technologies. Or, you know, when people get really upset that their hockey team loses and then they burn out a city like in Vancouver, where people were, while they're burning the city, thought it was a good idea to take pictures of themselves and share them on Twitter. Really. But this is not just bad, right? It's also beautiful. This is one of the pictures from that riot that is just beautiful and lovely and sweet. And anyways, or the riots in London, remember those? The David Cameron government blaming BlackBerry and Twitter for young people in Britain standing up against, you know, the fact that they don't feel that they don't have any chances in society anymore. And it wasn't just the riots that were organized through BlackBerry and Twitter. The cleanup subsequently was organized that way as well. Or of course, Occupy Wall Street, right? Or Occupy everything, Occupy together, Planet Occupy. Really cannot be seen outside of the mediation of it. So these are 3 ways of looking at living in media that make it increasingly impossible to think those 2 things apart. And I think that is the most profound context, also for media professionals, is that when everybody is media, when everybody tells stories, when everybody shares everything they do in media, then your story is not more or less valid than anybody else's. Right? And it's not that you're competing with these people. It's like, I mean, it's like you are an audience of them as much as they are an audience of you. It's an entirely different type of relationship. And unless professionals don't accept that, whatever they will end up making will be just, they won't have the effect that they wanted to have and might actually become utterly and completely irrelevant. So how do we see the context of creative labor moving? Well, I don't have enough time to go into all of that depth. These are some typical shots of creative work environments. But one thing that we see, but the whole world living in media, is that creative work or cultural work goes global, right? Media can be made anywhere. It's not dependent on place anymore. And that's not just some fancy sociological phenomenon. It's something that impacts the work of journalists, for example. Think about remote-controlled journalism, where entire sections of American business reporting are done in India. Or in Germany, where online divisions of German newspapers work in the Czech Republic just because they don't have a union for online journalists.